Hi everyone, hello again. Thank you for joining me for the second online lesson in our Heritage Education series. If you missed the first lesson on Native Americans and the First Structures, be sure to check it out. My name is Amy Sunny and I'm the Director of Education for the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach. Today we're going to continue learning about the built environment. Now if you watched our first lesson, I hope that you remember what that is. The built environment consists of all of the buildings that have been built around us. Now we're going to learn about our first architectural style, vernacular architecture, and the early pioneers. But first, I want to quickly recap our last lesson. So for a quick review, hopefully you all remember that we were learning about Indian mounds. So I'm hoping that you all who are watching at home might be able to tell me what type of mound this is. If you said that that's a midden or a trash heap, you'd be correct. What about this mound right here? Do you have any ideas? That's right, this is a burial mound or a cemetery. And what about the last type of mound right here? If you said that that's a platform mound, you'd be correct. And platform mounds were used for homes and for temples, and the higher the mound, the more important the home, and the highest mound was always reserved for the temple. And what about this type of structure? We learned about this towards the end of our last lesson. Does anybody remember the name? That's right, this is a chickee. And some of the important features of the chickee would be the palm frond thatched roof, the wood construction, and also the fact that it has a raised platform. Hopefully you all can see the raised platform right here. And that was very useful because it would help keep the Seminoles above the ground level so they weren't specifically down by all of the bugs and the critters that might be crawling around. And also if there was any kind of rain or any kind of flooding, they were up above that. And hopefully you all remember the name of the type of roof that we learned. That was our first vocabulary word. It was the upside down V, if you remember making that. And that would be our gable roof. So if everybody can see right here, the upside down V, that would be the gable roof. Okay, great job everyone, good recap. So let's get started talking about architectural style. Now I want you all to think about architectural style sort of like fashion. And fashion changes over time, right? Would you guys want to wear the same type of clothes that your parents wore? What about your grandparents? Maybe some of you would like that, but I bet you most of you said, no way, I don't want to wear the same clothes that my grandparents wore. And architectural style is sort of similar to that. Styles were always growing and changing and evolving. So the architectural style is a building's special look or design. It's a combination of the building's shape, age, materials, ornamentation, and decorative details. And the style names are a way to explain a building's appearance. So hopefully you all have had a chance to find our Heritage Education Workbook on the Preservation Foundation website. If you haven't found it yet, just go to the Preservation Foundation's website and go under Education in the Heritage Education tab, and you'll be able to find a link that has our complete Heritage Education Workbook. Now, if you haven't been able to print out the whole workbook, hopefully you can all print out page 26, which is this architectural style key and timeline. So we're going to be using this throughout the next several lessons to track all of the different architectural styles that we learn about. So if you see right here, our first architectural style today, hopefully everybody can see the green bar that's right here. And this is for our frame vernacular style of architecture. Now I want everybody watching at home to take a look at the different dates that are listed on this timeline and tell me what event started this architectural style and what event ended this. Everybody see this? So if you look here around 1860, which is around the start of our frame vernacular time period, you can see that the Jupiter Lighthouse was completed. And around the end of this architectural styles time frame, you can see that in 1894, Henry Flagler brought the railroad. Now, if you're following along at home, make sure that you take your colored pencil or your marker or your crayons, whatever you might have, and color in a spot for the frame vernacular on this timeline. And then come down here in the architectural style key and make sure that you write frame vernacular and write it in the same color or tie the color back so that you know what style this is. And again, this was on page 26 in the Heritage Education Workbook. So, we know that Florida is not the oldest state in the United States, right? Florida was actually the 27th state. It was incorporated as a state in 1845. And the area that we're in now didn't used to be called Palm Beach County. It was actually called Mosquito County. Does everybody see that over here on the side of the map where it was called Mosquito County? And can you see that there are actually a lot less counties than there are today? So why do you all think that this area was called Mosquito County? You probably guessed it. It was because they had a lot of mosquitoes in this area. So the early pioneers, why did they want to come to Florida? Who would want to travel to Mosquito County? What can you think of? What were reasons that the pioneers might want to come here? If you said that you thought maybe they were looking for excitement and adventure, that would be correct. The pioneers oftentimes didn't have much money, but they were adventurous and they were looking for new experiences and they were looking for adventure. So they traveled all the way to Mosquito County. And as I said, the pioneers didn't often have a lot of money, but they were very resourceful. And we like to say that they would wear many hats, which is an idiom. So for all of my fourth graders out there, if you've learned about what an idiom is, what do you think it means to say that they would wear many hats? Hopefully you said that it means that they had many jobs. So the early pioneers, because there weren't very many of them and there weren't many people in this area, they had to perform a lot of different jobs and a lot of different tasks. They had to be the farmer, they had to be the builder, the fireman, the policeman, they had to be the cook, and everything in between. So they were very resourceful, even though they didn't have a lot of money. Now, when we say that they didn't have a lot of money, how do you think that they were able to get supplies and materials? Could they just go down the street to the Home Depot in order to get the supplies to build a house? No, they couldn't. At this point in time, there weren't any stores in this area of Florida. So how do you think that they were able to get their materials? If you said shipwrecks, you would be correct. So there were 64 vessels that wrecked off the southeast coast of Florida in 1825. And between 1848 and 1857, there were 499 shipwrecks valued at over $16 million in total. Now, 499, that's a lot of shipwrecks. So where do you think that all of the supplies from the shipwrecks went? They actually some would sink, of course, but a lot of the supplies and a lot of the different parts of the ships would actually wash up on shore. And the pioneers could walk along the shore and find different materials with which to build and find different supplies. And one specific shipwreck, the Providencia, that wrecked in 1878, was actually carrying a lot of coconuts. And those were actually washed up on shore and they were planted and they sprung into palm trees. And that's how this area became known as Palm Beach. So how do you stop ships from wrecking off the coast? Does anybody out there have any ideas? You're able to stop the ships by, you guessed it, building a lighthouse. Does everybody see here the lighthouse? And the picture of the early pioneers just right here by the lighthouse? So in 1860, the Jupiter Lighthouse was constructed. And this really was a game changer for South Florida in terms of encouraging people to come here and move here. Becoming a lighthouse keeper was actually a very good job. And so it helped bring people to the area because they wanted to come here to take on that great job of running the Jupiter Lighthouse. Now, around that same time that the Jupiter Lighthouse was built, The Seminoles, which we learned about in our last lesson, were living very peacefully in the Everglades. The Seminole Wars were over, and the area known as the Everglades, we all think of it today as being somewhat further south. Most of the time, my students would say that they think the Everglades are down in Miami or maybe near Fort Lauderdale. But actually, back in this time period, the Everglades were much, much closer to the Palm Beach area. In fact, they were as close as West Palm Beach. And the area was a dense tropical wilderness. So you can see here a picture of a Seminole village. And what do you see that looks familiar that we've learned about? Hopefully you said that you see chickees. Does everybody see that over here? You can see the palm frond thatched roofs and the wood construction. They're located near a source of water. So they were still using the chickees. Now the Seminoles were very helpful to the local pioneers. They actually helped them to learn about farming. They helped them to learn about fishing. They traded with them, and they taught them how to survive in the rugged wilderness that was Mosquito County and the Palm Beach area. So we know that the lighthouse helped to bring some people to this area, but what really brought people to Palm Beach was the Homestead Act of 1862, or free land for all. Not quite for everyone, but what this act said was that if you were a male over the age of 18 and you moved here and established a parcel of land, you could live on the land, and you had to improve it or farm it for a period of 10 years, and after that you would own the land. So we talked about that most of the pioneers didn't have a lot of money. They might never have a chance to own that amount of land before they came to Florida, but by coming to Mosquito County and taking on that homestead, they were actually able to get free land. But don't forget what they had to go through in order to get that. So you'll see here on the left, this is an illustration showing some of the pesky mosquitoes. And I know that it's a little bit silly because the mosquitoes are so large. However, there was a joke that used to say that the mosquito was the state bird of Florida. Now, I don't think that the mosquitoes were quite as big as birds, but they certainly were quite irritating to the early pioneers. And as you can see from the picture on the right, it was a dense tropical wilderness with all sorts of different animals. So what might you have hoped to see in terms of animals in this area? You might see bears, you might see alligators, you would certainly have all types of different pests, including mosquitoes and flies and other types of flying creatures. What else do you think you might encounter? Hopefully everybody can think of a few different animals that they might have found in Florida during the time of the pioneers. So we know that we said that the pioneers were hungry for adventure, and that's mostly what brought them to Florida. So you can see here on the left, this is a picture of the Pierce family. Perhaps you've been able to read about Charlie Pierce in The Last Egret. And the Pierce family moved here, again, seeking adventure and also looking for land. And then on the right, you can see a picture of Mr. Hammond, who was the first person to sell his property for over $1 million to Henry Flagler. So this is a picture of an early pioneer house. So what do you guys think? Does this look like a pretty good house to live in? Usually my fourth graders in the classroom say that they would not want to live here. So what building materials do you see? We've learned about a lot of this already. You can all see that they have used palm fronds that are thatched to create, in this case, the roof and also the walls of this house. You can also see wood. Does everybody see the wood right here for framing? So does this look like it would be a very sturdy or very stable house? Not really. And if you look, there's some water right nearby because the pioneers would have needed fresh water, so they would be building near the water. But does it look like this home is elevated at all? No, right? It's sitting right on the ground level. So if that water rises for any reason, perhaps a heavy rain, this house might get flooded. So it certainly doesn't look like it could stand up to some of the intense weather that we get here in South Florida. Here's another example of a pioneer home. Does this one look like a little bit more like a house? Most of the time people say yes. So you can actually see it does have some wood siding right here. It still has that palm frond thatched roof, and they've added a very important feature. They've added a front porch, because what did they not have to keep them cool in the pioneer times? Today we all rely on our air conditioning, right, to keep us cool. However, the pioneers didn't have air conditioning, so they had to find ways to stay in the shade to help keep themselves cool. Therefore, a front porch could be very, very important. So here's one more example of a pioneer home. Now I'd like to ask everyone to guess what they think this home is made out of. So while you're watching at home, I'll give you some of the guesses that I usually get from my fourth graders. So usually the first thing that they guess is that it's made out of stone. It's not made out of stone, it's not made out of wood, it's not made out of stucco, and it's not made out of brick. Do you have any other ideas? Well, if you said that it's made of canvas, you would be correct. This is actually known as castle canvas, and the exterior walls, which you can see here, are actually made from the canvas from a ship's sail. So remember, we talked about the fact that the pioneers would go walk along the beach and find items that they could salvage from shipwrecks. So in this case, they were able to find a canvas sail and use that as the exterior building material for the house. So we're learning about vernacular architecture. And vernacular architecture is a type of architecture based on local needs and construction materials that follow local traditions. So again, we're saying local needs, local materials, and local traditions. So do you think that the vernacular architecture in Florida would look like the vernacular architecture in California? What about the architecture in Chicago or New York? No, right? Because we're talking about local needs, local materials, and local traditions. So we're going to learn about our first architectural style. This is the frame vernacular style. And I want to go through a couple of vocabulary words. Now, throughout all of our lessons, we're going to be learning a lot of vocabulary so that you'll all be experts in architectural vocabulary by the time we're done. So the first thing to talk about is the gable roof. Now we learned this already. If everybody can see right here, the upside down V, you can make your upside down V and remember that that's the gable roof. We also have our first type of windows, which you can see here, known as sash windows. And maybe a lot of you have sash windows in your own homes. Sash windows are the kind that you have to push the window up and then pull it back down. How many of you watching at home have sash windows? If you're not sure, go take a look at your windows and see what kind they are. Additionally, in addition to the sash windows, we have our wood siding. Again, this is called frame vernacular, so the building is built out of wood. And the wood siding, in this case, if it's vertical, is called board and batten, or just has battens. And if it's horizontal, it's called shiplap siding. We also have right here a decorative truss in the gable. So everybody remember the decorative truss. Now this structure, you might notice, looks a little bit familiar. So can anybody guess what this building is? Maybe some of you have been to visit before. If you said that you think that this is the Little Red Schoolhouse, you would be correct. So this is a picture of the Little Red Schoolhouse when it opened in 1886. And you can see standing right in the doorway, Miss Hattie Gale, the first school teacher. And hopefully some of you have had a chance to visit the Little Red Schoolhouse. But you can see all of those great features that we just talked about. You can see the gable roof. You can see the sash windows. You can see the vertical board and batten siding. And you can see the decorative truss in the gable. So here it is today. The Little Red Schoolhouse still exists, and it's run by the Preservation Foundation as a living history program for students. Typically, every day of the school year, we have fourth graders from all over the area come to experience a typical pioneer school day. If you haven't had a chance to visit, I highly encourage you to do so, and you can find more information about the Little Red Schoolhouse on the Preservation Foundation's website. And here's an example, or here's a photograph of one of the first classes of school children at the Little Red Schoolhouse. Now you can see how happy all of these children look. remember that at this time, going to school was really a privilege. Many children never had the chance to go to an actual school. They were only able to learn from their parents at home. So if you weren't going to school, you typically had to stay home and help your parents with chores. Maybe you had to cook or to clean or to go out hunting or fishing. So it was really an exciting time for children to be able to go to school instead of having to stay home and do chores. So we know that we learned about a smaller structure in our frame vernacular architectural style with the little red schoolhouse. However, frame vernacular could also be expanded to make larger structures. You can see here the Coconut Grove House Hotel from 1880, which is obviously a much bigger structure, but hopefully you can see some of the same elements. If you look right here, you can still see a gable roof. You can see that it has sash windows, and you can see that it's wood construction. They also have a big, deep front porch here on the front of the building, again, to help keep everybody nice and cool. And you can see that the building is built very close to the water. We also have the Jupiter Inlet Life-Saving Station. Now, this was in 1885, and these inlet life-saving stations were built all along the coast. Why do you think that these were built? Remember, we talked about that there were a lot of shipwrecks, and so these different life-saving stations were positioned so that if by chance you happened to wreck your ship off the coast, you could come ashore and find shelter, temporarily at least, in one of these life-saving stations. There would be some food and supplies left in each station, and every few days somebody would check the station just to make sure that nobody was camping out in it. So at least if you wrecked off the coast, you might be able to find shelter until somebody could come and find you. We also have here an example of Bethesda by the Sea Church from 1889. Maybe a lot of you are familiar with Bethesda by the Sea today, the big stone Gothic church in Palm Beach. But this is what the first Bethesda looked like. So you can see here that this looks quite similar to the little red schoolhouse. You have your gable roof, you still have the decorative truss, you even have your sash windows, and in this instance you have the horizontal shiplap wood siding. And you can see that as this was a church, they gave it a little bit more decoration. So it has the triangles over the windows, and it also has a larger front porch. Now, we talk about this area as life in lake country. So when most people think of Palm Beach today, they think about the ocean. However, the ocean really wasn't the primary focus for the pioneers. The pioneers and all of the initial development in Palm Beach was actually focused around the lakeside. Now, we call it the lake. However, today we typically call this the Intracoastal Waterway. However, back at the time of the pioneers, this actually was a lake. It was Lake Worth. And most of the pioneer activities centered around the lake. They used the lake for transportation, so they would go boating up and down the lake and use the boats to get around on the island. And they would also be able to fish in the lake or go out to just enjoy a picnic or some time with friends. And remember, there weren't that many pioneers at the time, so they were a tight-knit community. They banded together to be friends and to help one another to get through the difficult times living here in Mosquito County. So here's another example of a boat on the lake. And one last important thing to know about this time period. Does anybody know who this gentleman is? If you said that he's the Barefoot Mailman, that would be correct. And the Barefoot Mailman ran the Star Route in 1885. Now, this was a very difficult and very dangerous job. The Barefoot Mailman would walk from Palm Beach to Miami. It would take him 3 days to go there. He would turn around and it would take him 3 days to walk back, and he would be able to rest for 1 day. And then he would do it all over again. So that was a very difficult job. Now, why do you think that he walked? Perhaps because they didn't have any cars. They actually didn't have horses in this area either. We didn't have roads. So where was the safest place for the mailman to walk? He would walk along the beach. because he wouldn't get lost that way. He would know exactly where to go to get down to Miami. And also because we talked about the dense wilderness and all of the animals and different creatures and critters that might be hiding out there. So he was really safest if he stayed right by the beach. Still, it was a very dangerous job, and there were several different mailmen who actually held this post, but it was also an incredibly important job. Because if you were a pioneer in this area, could you pick up your cell phone and call your family back up north to see how they're doing? I don't think so. The only way that you could communicate was to send letters. So being able to send and receive mail was incredibly important. All right, so let's just do a quick review. Who can tell me, I hope you were all paying attention, the name of this architectural style? That's right, this is the frame vernacular architectural style. And what about some of the most common features? We all talked about the gable roof, right? Everybody sees the gable roof here, or the upside down V. Hopefully you see the sash windows, the vertical board and batten siding, and if the siding is horizontal, it's called shiplap and it's made out of wood. And then again, you have the decorative truss right here in the gable. Great job, everyone, learning about our first architectural style. Now we have a brief activity for you to try at home. So hopefully you all have a tape measure and know how to use a tape measure. And if you'll remember at the end of our first lesson, I gave you a little bit of homework and asked you to work on a floor plan of your bedroom. So here's an example. In this bedroom, it's 10 feet by 12 feet or 120 square feet total. And we located the door and a window and the bed and 2 nightstands. Now, I wonder what you all maybe had in your room. Perhaps you had your bed, maybe you had a desk and a dresser. And I'm wondering what else maybe you had in your bedroom and how big your bedroom was. So I want you to think about that as you go through this next activity. So this activity involves trying to recreate the size of a pioneer home. So we have here on the left a picture of the Tyndall family. Now there were 6 people in the family, the husband and the wife and 4 children. And the average pioneer home was no larger than 15 feet by 20 feet. So where you are at home, whether you're inside your house or outside, if you could measure out a 15-foot by 20-foot space, and then think about all of the different things that need to go into that house, and perhaps you might be able to locate some of those. So you want to think about the location of the windows and the doors. There probably would only be 1 door on the house, maybe 2. And you would want to think about how you could locate the windows and the doors so that you might be able to have some cross ventilation. Because remember, there wasn't any air conditioning at this time period. So you might put, say, 4 or 6 or 8 windows in the house, 1 door. Of course, you're going to have a hearth or a fireplace, because you might need it for the nights when it's chilly. You might also need it for cooking, although typically most of the cooking was done further away from the structure, because what were all of these structures made out of? They were mostly made out of wood. So it was very dangerous to have a fire right near your wood home if you didn't need to. So think about where you would locate all of these different features, and then what would you need to have in the house for a family of 6? You would all need a bed, so you'll need to locate 6 beds. You would need a table and chairs. And what else might you have in there? I hope that you all at home can work on this activity to see what you might be able to fit in a 15-foot by 20-foot house, and whether or not you would like sharing such a small space with all of the different members of your family. Well, that sums up our activity for today. And that ends our lesson. So I hope that you all enjoyed learning about the pioneers and frame vernacular architecture. And we look forward to seeing you for our next lesson. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.